Isabella Romano's wedding dress dragged through oil and concrete as she ran barefoot through the underground garage, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, footsteps echoed, her father's security team closing in. The diamond choker at her throat felt like a noose, bought and paid for by the man waiting at the altar. A man whose reputation for violence had reached her ears in whispers and warnings. She had two choices: marry a monster to save her family from debt, or run and risk everything. The black limousine's door hung open like salvation. She didn't hesitate. She dove inside, pulling the door shut just as shouts erupted behind her. What she didn't know was that this car belonged to someone far more dangerous than the man she was running from, and her life was about to change forever. If you're loving this story of escape, danger, and unexpected protection, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Isabella's story travels. Now let's begin. The morning had started with her mother's trembling hands and her father's cold silence. Isabella Romano stood in the bridal suite of the Grand Cathedral, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The dress was exquisite, imported lace, hand-sewn crystals, a train that flowed behind her like water. It cost more than most people earned in a year. It was also a cage, beautiful and suffocating. "You look perfect," her mother whispered, adjusting the veil with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. Maria Romano had once been a vibrant woman, full of laughter and warmth. Now she was a shadow, worn down by years of her husband's gambling debts and broken promises. "Vincent will be so pleased." Vincent Costello. The name alone made Isabella's stomach turn. She'd met him exactly twice before this morning. The first time he'd looked at her the way men look at property they're considering purchasing. The second time, he'd gripped her wrist hard enough to leave bruises when she'd tried to pull away from his unwanted kiss, his breath reeking of expensive scotch and barely concealed contempt. "This is good for the family," her father had said when he'd announced the engagement 3 months ago. Translation: Vincent was paying off Antonio Romano's considerable debts in exchange for a young, beautiful wife he could control. A transaction, nothing more. "Mama," Isabella said quietly, meeting her mother's eyes in the mirror, "I can't do this." Maria's face crumpled with something between pity and fear. "Bella, please, don't make this harder than it already is. Your father, the debt. We'll lose everything. They'll kill him. They'll kill all of us." "And what happens to me?" Isabella's voice cracked. "What kind of life will I have with a man like that?" Her mother looked away, unable to answer, because they both knew the truth. Vincent Costello was known for his temper, his possessiveness, his need for absolute control. His first wife had died in a tragic accident that nobody believed was truly accidental. His mistresses rarely lasted more than a few months before they disappeared from public view, their spirits broken. The door burst open, and Isabella's father strode in, resplendent in his rented tuxedo. Antonio Romano had the look of a man who'd once been handsome but had let desperation and vice hollow him out from the inside. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched. "It's time," he announced. "The car is waiting." "Papa, Not another word." His voice was sharp, final. "You'll walk down that aisle, you'll say your vows, and you'll be grateful that a man like Vincent Costello even looked twice at damaged goods like you." The words hit like a slap. Damaged goods. Because she wasn't a virgin, because she'd had a boyfriend in college that her father had disapproved of, because she dared to want something for herself once upon a time. "Antonio," her mother protested weakly. "Shut up, Maria." He grabbed Isabella's arm, his grip bruising. "We're leaving, now." The ride to the cathedral was silent except for her mother's quiet sniffling in the front seat. Isabella sat in the back, her father beside her like a warden, watching her with suspicious eyes, as if he expected her to throw herself from the moving vehicle. She considered it. The cathedral loomed ahead, all Gothic spires and stained glass, beautiful in the morning light. Inside, 300 guests were waiting. Outside, a dozen black cars lined the circular drive, Vincent's people, making sure everything went according to plan. As they pulled up to the entrance, Isabella saw him. Vincent Costello stood at the top of the stone steps, immaculate in his custom suit, his dark hair slicked back, his smile predatory. He was handsome in a sharp, dangerous way, and his eyes were utterly cold. "Remember," her father hissed as the car stopped. "You smile, you behave, and you marry him. Our lives depend on it." The door opened. Her father climbed out first, then turned to offer his hand. Isabella took it because she had no choice, stepping out into the crisp October morning. Her heels clicked on the pavement. The dress seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Vincent descended the steps to greet her, taking her hand from her father's grip. His fingers were cold, possessive. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice smooth as silk and just as dangerous. "Worth every penny." Her stomach churned. She forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "I need a moment," she said suddenly. "The bathroom, before the ceremony." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "Make it quick. We're already running late." "I'll go with her," her mother started to say. "No." Vincent's tone left no room for argument. He gestured to one of his men, a thick-necked enforcer with dead eyes. "Marco will escort her, to make sure she doesn't get lost." The implication was crystal clear. She was already his prisoner. Marco followed her into the cathedral, through the ornate lobby, down a side corridor toward the bathrooms. Isabella's mind raced. This was her last chance. Once she walked down that aisle, once she said those vows, her life was over. She would belong to Vincent Costello in every legal and practical sense, and there would be no escape. She thought of her mother's bruises, carefully hidden beneath makeup and long sleeves. She thought of Vincent's first wife, dead at 32. She thought of the rest of her life stretching ahead like a prison sentence. No. As they passed a service entrance, Isabella made her decision. Marco was checking his phone, distracted for just a second. She kicked off her heels, hiked up her dress, and ran. "Hey!" Marco's shout echoed behind her. "Stop!" But Isabella was already through the service door, her bare feet slapping against linoleum as she sprinted down a service corridor. Behind her, she heard Marco calling for backup, his heavy footsteps pounding after her. She burst through another door and found herself in a stairwell. Down. She had to go down, get to street level, get away. Her lungs burned as she took the stairs 2 at a time, the dress tangling around her legs. She heard doors slamming above her, multiple sets of footsteps now. They were coming. The stairwell ended in a heavy metal door marked "Parking, Authorized Personnel Only." Isabella slammed through it and found herself in an underground garage, dim and echoing. Rows of cars stretched in every direction. She ran, zigzagging between vehicles, her wedding dress leaving a trail of white in the shadows. "There!" A shout behind her. 2 of Vincent's men had entered the garage. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her feet were bleeding, leaving dark smudges on the concrete. She ducked behind a concrete pillar, pressing herself against the cold stone, trying to quiet her ragged breathing. Footsteps approached. She could hear them talking. "She can't have gone far. Check every row." "Vincent's going to lose his mind." "Better we find her before he does. You know what he's like." Yes. Isabella knew exactly what he was like. That was why she was running. She peered around the pillar and spotted it. A black limousine parked in a reserved space near the elevator, its rear door slightly ajar. The interior was dark, inviting. A hiding place. She didn't think. She just moved. In 3 silent strides, she crossed the space and slipped into the limousine's back seat, pulling the door shut as quietly as possible. The interior was luxurious. Leather seats, tinted windows, the faint smell of expensive cologne. She crouched on the floor, her dress billowing around her, and held her breath. Footsteps passed within feet of the car. Voices argued about which direction she'd gone. Minutes ticked by that felt like hours. Isabella stayed frozen, her muscles cramping, her heart trying to break free from her chest. Slowly, the voices faded. The footsteps receded. Silence settled over the garage like a blanket. She was about to risk sitting up when she heard a new sound. The smooth whoosh of the elevator doors opening. Footsteps approached, measured and confident. A man's voice speaking into a phone. "The meeting's confirmed for 2 o'clock. Tell Rossi I want the contracts reviewed before I sign anything. No, I don't care what his deadline is. My timeline, my terms." The footsteps stopped right beside the limousine. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. The driver's door opened and closed. The engine purred to life, smooth and powerful. Then the vehicle began to move. Isabella's mind raced. She should announce herself, apologize, ask to be let out. But terror kept her frozen. What if this person knew Vincent? What if they took her straight back to the cathedral? What if... The limousine emerged from the garage into brilliant sunlight. Through the tinted windows, Isabella watched the cathedral recede in the distance. With every block they traveled, Vincent and her father and that nightmare wedding fell further away. She was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Her feet throbbed. Her throat was dry. The diamond choker her father had insisted she wear, a gift from Vincent, a claim of ownership, felt like it was strangling her. The limousine glided through the city streets, smooth as silk. 10 minutes passed. 15. They left the downtown area, heading toward the affluent neighborhoods on the city's edge, where old money lived behind gates and walls. Finally, the car slowed, turning into a private drive. Isabella risked lifting her head just enough to peer out the window. They were passing through massive iron gates, sliding smoothly closed behind them. A long drive stretched ahead, lined with mature trees, leading to an estate that looked more like a fortress than a home. Her heart sank. Whoever owned this car was clearly powerful, wealthy, and well-protected. Not someone who would appreciate finding a stowaway in their vehicle. The limousine stopped in front of a massive stone mansion. The engine cut off. Isabella heard the driver's door open and close, then footsteps walking around the vehicle. She pressed herself into the corner, making herself as small as possible, knowing it was futile. The rear door opened. Sunlight flooded in, and with it, the man who owned this vehicle. Isabella found herself looking up at someone who seemed carved from shadows and stone. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. His face was striking, all sharp angles and controlled power. Dark hair, darker eyes that missed nothing. He couldn't have been much over 35, but there was an agelessness to him, a sense of someone who'd seen and done things that would break lesser men. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Isabella stared back, unable to look away, her breath coming in short gasps. She must look insane. A bride in a torn, dirty dress, crouched on the floor of his limousine, her feet bleeding, her eyes wide with fear. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep, controlled, and carrying an edge that suggested he was rarely surprised by anything. I assume there's an explanation for why there's a terrified bride hiding in my car. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with the kind of calm that was somehow more intimidating than shouting would have been. Isabella's voice came out as a whisper. "I'm sorry, I was running and I needed to hide, and the door was open and She was babbling now, her words tumbling over each other. "Please, I know this looks bad, but I can explain. I just need—" "Out of the car," he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Now." She climbed out on shaking legs, nearly collapsing as her abused feet touched the ground. He caught her elbow, steadying her with a grip that was firm, but not painful. Up close, he was even more imposing, easily 6'3", with the kind of presence that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. His eyes swept over her, taking in every detail. The torn dress, the bleeding feet, the bruises on her wrists where her father had gripped her, the red marks on her throat where the choker had pressed too tight. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're hurt," he observed. "I'm fine," Isabella lied. I should go. I'm sorry for the intrusion. You'll just what?" He released her arm but didn't step back, effectively blocking her path. "Walk away in a ruined wedding dress and bare feet? That seems unlikely to end well for you." She lifted her chin, trying to summon some dignity. "That's not your concern." "No," he agreed. "But you made it my concern when you decided to use my car as a hiding place. So let me ask you again. What are you running from? And before you answer, understand that I have very little patience for lies." There was something in his eyes, a kind of dark knowledge that told Isabella this man would know if she lied, and that lying to him would be a very bad idea. "A wedding," she said finally. "An arranged marriage to a man who isn't kind." "Isn't kind." He repeated the words with something that might have been dark amusement. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it. Based on the bruises on your neck and wrists, I'd say we're well beyond not kind into territory that involves actual violence. She flinched, one hand rising unconsciously to her throat. His eyes tracked the movement. Who's the groom? That's not who is the groom. The command in his voice was absolute. Isabella found herself answering before she could think better of it. Vincent Costello. The change in the man's expression was subtle but unmistakable. His eyes went cold, dangerous. Costello, the one who runs the gambling operations on the east side? Whose first wife died in a convenient accident? You know him. I know of him. There's a difference. He studied her for another long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. My name is Lorenzo Valle. This is my home. And you're going to come inside, let someone tend to your injuries, and tell me exactly what you're running from. Then we'll discuss what happens next. I can't, Isabella protested. They'll be looking for me. My father, Vincent's people. If they find me here, They won't find you here, Lorenzo cut her off, his voice carrying absolute certainty. No one enters my property without my permission. You're safe. Safe. The word sounded foreign, impossible. Isabella couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe. As if sensing her hesitation, Lorenzo's expression softened, barely, but enough. I'm not offering out of charity, Miss Romano. Isabella Romano. Miss Romano. I'm offering because I have a strong aversion to men like Vincent Costello, and an even stronger aversion to seeing women hurt. You have 30 seconds to decide. Come inside where you're protected, or leave and take your chances with whatever's hunting you. But choose quickly, because I guarantee that by now, Costello has people combing every block of this city looking for his missing bride. He was right. She knew he was right. By now, Vincent would have discovered her gone. Her father would be in a panic. They would be tearing the city apart, and when they found her, she didn't want to think about what would happen when they found her. Isabella looked up at the mansion, then back at Lorenzo Valle. Everything about him screamed danger. The controlled power, the dark eyes that missed nothing, the aura of someone who was accustomed to absolute authority. But there was something else there too. Something in the way he'd noticed her bruises, the tightening of his jaw, the cold anger when she'd mentioned Vincent's name. One condition, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. You tell me who you are, really, because men don't have security like this. She gestured at the gates. The cameras she could see mounted discreetly on the property walls. Unless they're hiding from something or someone. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fair enough. I run security consulting for high-profile clients. Politicians, celebrities, people who need protection and discretion, which means I have enemies, yes, but I also have resources. And right now those resources can keep you alive. It was a deflection more than an answer, and they both knew it, but it was also true. She could see that in his eyes. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Lorenzo stepped aside, gesturing toward the mansion's entrance. After you, Miss Romano. As Isabella walked through the massive wooden doors, her ruined dress trailing behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just traded one dangerous situation for another. But at least this danger came with a choice. And after a lifetime of having no choices at all, that was something. The interior of Lorenzo's home was stunning. All soaring ceilings, dark wood, and carefully curated art. But Isabella barely noticed. Her adrenaline was crashing, her legs were shaking, and the full weight of what she'd just done was beginning to settle over her like a stone. She'd run from her own wedding, humiliated her father, broken an agreement that was supposed to save her family from Vincent's wrath. Whatever consequences were coming, they would be severe. This way, Lorenzo said, guiding her through a hallway to what looked like a sitting room. He gestured to a leather sofa. Sit. I'll have someone bring medical supplies and clean clothes. Isabella sank onto the sofa, her legs finally giving out. She watched as Lorenzo pulled out his phone and made a quick call. I need a medical kit in the south sitting room, and contact Maria. Tell her I need women's clothing, size. He glanced at Isabella with an assessing eye that was clinical rather than appreciative. Size 4, I'd estimate. Something comfortable. Yes, immediately. He ended the call and turned his full attention back to Isabella. In the better light of the sitting room, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably not even 40. But there was something ancient in his eyes, a weariness that came from seeing too much of humanity's darkness. "You said your father arranged this marriage," he said, not sitting, instead standing in that unnaturally still way that suggested a man who was always ready to move, always alert. "How much debt is he in?" "I don't know the exact amount. Hundreds of thousands. Maybe more. He gambles. Has for years. My mother tried to stop him, but..." She trailed off, the old shame and anger mixing in her chest. "And Costello agreed to clear the debt in exchange for you." It wasn't a question, but Isabella nodded anyway. "My father said it was the only way, that if I didn't marry Vincent, we'd all be killed, that it was my duty to save the family." "And what about your duty to yourself?" Lorenzo's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. Isabella looked up at him, surprised. "That's not how it works in my world. Family comes first. Family is everything. Family should protect you, not sell you to monsters." The words hit hard because they were true. She'd been telling herself for months that her father loved her, that this was just a desperate situation, that he wouldn't do this if there was any other choice. But deep down, she knew. Antonio Romano had always put his own needs first, his own survival above everything else, including his daughter's life. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. A young woman entered carrying a medical kit and a bundle of clothing. She was petite, pretty, with warm brown eyes that widened slightly when she saw Isabella. "Mr. Vale," she said, her accent faintly Eastern European, "I brought everything you requested." "Thank you, Natasha." "Miss Romano, this is Natasha Petrova, my head of household staff. She'll help you clean up and tend to your injuries. I have some calls to make, but I'll be back shortly. We'll talk more then." He left without waiting for a response, his footsteps silent despite his size. The door clicked shut behind him. Natasha set down her supplies and offered Isabella a small, sympathetic smile. "You poor thing. Let's get you out of that dress and into something more comfortable, yes? Then I'll look at those feet." Isabella found herself nodding, too exhausted to protest. Natasha helped her stand and carefully began unhooking the seemingly endless row of buttons down the back of the wedding dress. As the expensive fabric fell away, Isabella felt like she was shedding a skin, stepping out of a life that had never fit. Underneath, she wore only simple undergarments. Natasha didn't comment on the bruises that were now fully visible, the finger marks on Isabella's upper arms, the pressure bruises around her wrists, the red marks on her throat from the diamond choker. "Mr. Vale doesn't like men who hurt women," Natasha said quietly as she helped Isabella into soft sweatpants and a comfortable sweater. "You're safe here. He'll make sure of it." "You seem very certain." Natasha's smile was sad and knowing. "I came to Mr. Vale 3 years ago, running from a man who thought he owned me. My former employer, he was a diplomat, very powerful. I was his maid, and he decided I should be more. When I said no," she gestured to a faint scar at her hairline, "Mr. Vale gave me sanctuary, helped me get citizenship, gave me a job, made sure my former employer understood that I was untouchable. So yes, I'm certain." Isabella absorbed this information as Natasha knelt to examine her feet. The practical care felt surreal after the morning's chaos. The efficient cleaning of cuts, the careful bandaging, the gentle hands. It was more kindness than anyone had shown her in months. "He's not what he seems, is he?" Isabella asked. "Lorenzo Val, the security consulting, that's not the whole story." Natasha glanced up, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Vale is exactly what he needs to be when he needs to be it. That's all you need to know right now. What matters is that you're under his protection, and that means something in this city." Before Isabella could press further, the door opened again. Lorenzo had returned, and he'd changed from his suit into more casual attire. Dark pants and a black shirt that somehow made him look even more dangerous than the formal wear had. "Better?" he asked, his eyes sweeping over her with that same clinical assessment. "Yes, thank you." He nodded to Natasha. "Give us a moment, please." Natasha gathered her supplies and left, closing the door quietly behind her. Lorenzo moved to the bar cart in the corner and poured 2 glasses of water, bringing one to Isabella before taking a seat in the chair across from her. I made some calls, he said without preamble. As expected, Vincent Castello is tearing the city apart looking for you. He's put out word to every contact he has, police, private security, even some federal connections. Your father is making statements to the press about a bride having cold feet, trying to downplay it, but Vincent isn't playing along. He's taking this as a personal insult. Isabella's hands tightened around the water glass. My family is currently being held at Castello's estate. Not harmed yet, but definitely under guard. Vincent wants leverage to bring you back. He's betting that you care enough about your mother to turn yourself in. The glass nearly slipped from Isabella's hands. Her mother, held prisoner because of her choice to run. I have to go back. I have to. You're not going anywhere. Lorenzo's voice was flat, final. That's exactly what he wants. You walk back into his hands, and you'll never get another chance to escape. And your mother will still be under his control, only now you will be too. So what am I supposed to do? Isabella's voice cracked. Let my mother suffer for my choices? You're supposed to let me handle it. He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. I have resources that Castello doesn't know about, connections that run deeper than his. Give me 24 hours to put some pieces in motion. I can get your mother out safely and make it clear to Vincent that pursuing you further would be inadvisable. Why? The question burst out of Isabella before she could stop it. Why would you do all this for a stranger? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Lorenzo was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, touched with something that might have been old pain. Let's just say I've seen what happens when powerful men think they own people, and I've made it my business to ensure that when I have the power to intervene, I do. Consider it a personal crusade against a very specific kind of evil. There was a story there, Isabella realized. Something that had shaped Lorenzo Val into the man he was. But before she could ask, he stood. You should rest. Natasha will show you to a guest room. You'll have everything you need, clothes, food, privacy. This house has 24-hour security. No one gets in or out without my knowledge. You're safe here, Miss Romano. I give you my word. Isabella wanted to believe him, desperately, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not after everything she'd been through. As if reading her thoughts, Lorenzo paused at the door. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm asking you to try. Because right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and a life you don't want. Then he was gone, leaving Isabella alone with her racing thoughts and the terrifying realization that her life had completely changed in the span of a few hours. She'd run from one powerful man directly into the orbit of another. The question was whether Lorenzo Val would prove to be her salvation or just another kind of prison. Only time would tell. Isabella didn't sleep that first night in Lorenzo's mansion, though Natasha had shown her to a guest room that was larger than her entire childhood bedroom. She sat by the window overlooking the estate's grounds, watching security personnel make their rounds, their movements precise and professional. The room itself was beautiful. Cream walls, plush carpeting, a four-poster bed that looked like something from a luxury hotel. But beauty didn't equal safety, and Isabella had learned long ago that comfortable cages were still cages. She kept thinking about her mother. Maria Romano had always been fragile, bent under the weight of her husband's failures and her own inability to protect her daughter. Now she was being held by Vincent, a pawn in his game to reclaim what he considered his property. The thought made Isabella's stomach churn with guilt and fury in equal measure. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Isabella finally allowed herself to close her eyes. Just for a moment, she told herself. Just to rest. She woke to gentle knocking on the door and pale afternoon light streaming through the windows. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache, and for a disorienting second she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, the escape, the limousine, Lorenzo Val's dark eyes assessing her like a puzzle he intended to solve. Miss Romano? Natasha's accented voice came through the door. I have lunch for you if you're hungry. Isabella sat up, wincing as her abused feet protested. Come in. Natasha entered carrying a tray laden with food, soup, fresh bread, fruit, and tea. She set it on the small table by the window with a smile that was both warm and knowing. Mr. Vale asks if you'll join him in his study when you're ready. No rush, though. He said to let you rest as long as you need. What time is it? Just after 2 in the afternoon. You slept about 6 hours. Natasha moved around the room with practiced efficiency, opening curtains wider, adjusting the temperature. There are clothes in the closet for you. I guessed at sizes, but everything should fit reasonably well. Isabella looked at the tray of food, her stomach suddenly reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Thank you for everything. It's my pleasure. Natasha paused at the door. Miss Romano, whatever Mr. Vale tells you today, whatever he asks of you, know that he doesn't make promises he can't keep. If he says he'll protect you, he will. If he says he can help your mother, he can. I know it's hard to trust, especially after what you've been through, but I've never seen him fail when he sets his mind to something. Then she was gone, leaving Isabella alone with her thoughts, and a meal she barely tasted despite her hunger. Every bite felt like guilt, knowing her mother might not be eating at all, might be locked in some room at Vincent's estate, terrified and alone. After forcing down half the soup and a piece of bread, Isabella showered and dressed in the clothes Natasha had provided. Dark jeans that fit perfectly, a soft cream sweater, even undergarments and comfortable flats. Someone had been very thorough in their assessment of her size. The thought should have been unsettling, but somehow it felt more like care than invasion. She found her way to Lorenzo's study, following Natasha's directions through the mansion's elegant hallways. The door was partially open and she could hear his voice inside, speaking in rapid Italian on the phone. She recognized enough of the language from her grandmother to know he was giving orders, his tone brooking no argument. Isabella knocked softly. The Italian stopped mid-sentence. Come in, Miss Romano. The study was exactly what she'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of dark wood, leather furniture that spoke of old money and older power. Lorenzo stood by the window, phone still in hand, dressed in charcoal pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked every inch the wealthy executive, except for the hardness in his eyes that suggested he'd built his empire with more than just business deals. He ended his call and gestured to one of the chairs facing his desk. How are you feeling? Like I've been hit by a truck, Isabella admitted, settling into the chair. The leather was butter soft, expensive. Everything in this room was expensive. But alive, that's something. It's everything. Lorenzo moved to his desk but didn't sit, instead leaning against its edge with his arms crossed. I've spent the morning making inquiries and calling in favors. I have news about your situation. Isabella's heart jumped. My mother is still at Costello's estate but unharmed. I have people watching the property. Vincent's keeping her comfortable because he still believes you'll trade yourself for her safety. His expression darkened. He's correct that most daughters would. He's underestimating your sense of self-preservation, which works in our favor. I want to see her, talk to her, make sure she's really okay. Not possible right now. Any contact you make can be traced, and Costello has more tech resources than you'd think. He's monitoring your father's phone, your mother's phone, every digital footprint your family has. Lorenzo pulled out his own phone and tapped the screen a few times before turning it to show her. But I can show you this. It was a photograph, grainy but clear enough. Her mother sitting in what looked like a comfortable room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked tired, worried, but unharmed. The timestamp showed it had been taken less than 2 hours ago. How did you... I have resources, Lorenzo said simply, pocketing the phone. People who owe me favors, others who work for me in various capacities. Let's just say that keeping an eye on Vincent Costello's activities is something I've found useful in the past. Isabella studied him, trying to piece together the puzzle of who Lorenzo Vale really was. Security consulting didn't explain the level of surveillance he apparently had access to, or the casual way he talked about having people positioned at a crime boss's estate. You're not just a security consultant, she said. It wasn't a question. No, he agreed, surprising her with his honesty. I'm not just anything. I've been many things over the years, worn many masks. Right now, what matters is that I'm someone who can help you, and someone Vincent Costello would be very unwise to cross. Why would he be unwise to cross you? Lorenzo's smile was cold, dangerous, because I know where all his bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. Vincent runs gambling operations, loan sharking, some prostitution on the side. He thinks he's untouchable because he has police connections and political friends. But I have something he doesn't: information, mountains of it, financial records, witness statements, evidence of murders his people committed. I've been building a file on Vincent Costello for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to use it. Why? Isabella leaned forward. Why would you care about taking down someone like Vincent? Because men like him need to be taken down. Lorenzo's voice was quiet but intense. Because they think they can own people, break them, discard them when they're done. And because— He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Let's just say I have personal reasons for wanting Vincent and men like him to face consequences. There was pain there, old and deep. Isabella wanted to push to know what drove this man who'd taken her in without hesitation, but before she could ask, Lorenzo straightened and moved behind his desk, pulling out a folder. Your father owes Vincent approximately $750,000, he said, opening the folder and scanning its contents. The debt's been accumulating for 4 years. Vincent bought it from the original creditors 6 months ago for pennies on the dollar, then tripled the amount he claimed your father owed through interest and fees. Legal extortion. Isabella's hands clenched in her lap. That's why my father agreed to the marriage. Vincent said he'd forgive the entire debt. And he would have. But you would have paid for it every day for the rest of your life. Lorenzo closed the folder and met her eyes. Here's what I'm proposing. I pay off your father's debt. All of it. That removes Vincent's primary leverage over your family. I can't let you— I'm not asking your permission, Lorenzo interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. The money means nothing to me. What matters is removing Vincent's claim on you and your family. Nothing comes without a price, Isabella said, her voice harder than she'd intended. What do you want in return? Lorenzo tilted his head, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Smart question. You're learning not to trust easy answers. He was silent for a moment, then spoke with careful precision. What I want is for you to stay here, under my protection, until we fully neutralize the threat Vincent poses. That could take days or weeks. I want you to follow my security protocols without question, and I want you to trust that I'm acting in your best interest. That's all? That's all. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But Isabella was running out of options, and Lorenzo had been nothing but honest with her so far, brutally so. Okay, she said finally. I'll stay. I'll follow your rules, but I want updates on my mother every day. And I want to know the truth about who you really are. The updates you'll get? The truth? Lorenzo's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile under different circumstances. The truth is complicated, Miss Romano, but I'll give you pieces of it as we go. Fair enough? Before Isabella could answer, there was a sharp knock at the study door. A man entered without waiting for permission, tall, lean, with sharp features and eyes that swept the room with military precision. He wore tactical pants and a dark shirt that did nothing to hide the weapon holstered at his hip. We have a situation, he said without preamble, his gaze flicking to Isabella before returning to Lorenzo. Costello's people are making noise. They're leaning on known associates, offering money for information about the girl. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but Isabella saw his hands tighten on the desk. How much money? $50,000 for information leading to her location. $100,000 if someone delivers her directly to Vincent. Isabella's blood ran cold. That was serious money, the kind that would tempt even loyal friends to betray her. Double our security rotations, Lorenzo said calmly. I want eyes on every approach to this property 24/7. And activate the secondary protocols. No one gets within a quarter mile without multiple confirmations. Already done. The man's eyes moved to Isabella again, this time with something that might have been sympathy. You should know that Costello's putting out a narrative that Miss Romano is mentally unstable, possibly dangerous to herself. He's claiming he's worried for her safety. Of course he is, Lorenzo said with dark amusement. It's a classic move, paint her as the problem so that when he finds her and drags her back, people think he's being protective rather than possessive. My father, Isabella said, her voice tight. He's going along with this? The man glanced at Lorenzo, who nodded permission to speak. Your father is telling anyone who will listen that you had a breakdown, that you've always been delicate, that the stress of the wedding was too much. He's begging Vincent to find you and bring you home safely. The betrayal shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. Isabella had known her father was weak, that he'd chosen himself over her again and again, but hearing it confirmed, knowing he was actively helping Vincent hunt her down, was like a knife between her ribs. "Thank you, Marcus," Lorenzo said. "Keep me updated every hour." Marcus nodded and left as efficiently as he'd arrived. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Isabella alone with Lorenzo and the crushing weight of her new reality. "My own father," she whispered. "He's helping Vincent find me." Lorenzo moved around the desk and, surprising her, crouched down so they were eye level. "Your father is a weak man who's spent his entire life running from consequences. He's not capable of protecting you because he's never learned to protect himself. That's not a reflection on you, it's a reflection on him." "He's still my father." "Biology doesn't make family," Lorenzo said quietly. "Love, loyalty, protection, those make family. And from what I can see, your father has given you none of those things." Isabella wanted to argue, to defend the man who'd raised her despite his flaws, but she couldn't, because Lorenzo was right. Antonio Romano had sold his daughter to save himself, and now he was helping hunt her down like a runaway slave. "What happens now?" she asked. Lorenzo stood, offering her his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm, steady, and for just a moment she felt grounded in a way she hadn't since this nightmare began. "Now we move forward with the plan," he said. "I'll arrange to pay off your father's debt through intermediaries, make it look like it's coming from a different source. That removes Vincent's financial leverage. Then we'll work on extracting your mother from his estate." "And Vincent? He's not going to just let this go." "No, he won't." Lorenzo's expression was grim. "Vincent's ego is wounded. He was publicly humiliated when his bride ran away on their wedding day. Money won't fix that. He wants you back not just because he thinks he owns you, but because he needs to prove that no one defies him and gets away with it." "So I'll never be safe." "You'll be safe," Lorenzo corrected. "But it will require making Vincent understand that pursuing you comes with consequences he's not willing to face, and that's where my information becomes useful." He moved back to his desk and pulled out another folder, this one significantly thicker than the first. When he opened it, Isabella could see photographs, financial documents, what looked like surveillance transcripts. "This is everything I have on Vincent Costello," Lorenzo explained. "Evidence of money laundering, racketeering, 3 murders that I can prove he ordered, and connections to a human trafficking ring that would put him away for life if it ever reached the right prosecutor." Isabella stared at the folder. "Why haven't you turned this in already?" "Because evidence is only useful if you have someone incorruptible to give it to, and Vincent has too many people on his payroll, judges, police, even some federal agents. If I handed this over through normal channels, it would disappear, and I'd become a target." Lorenzo closed the folder. "But leverage is different than evidence. Leverage is about making someone understand what you could do, what you're capable of, and why they should stay far away from you. You're going to blackmail him. I'm going to make him an offer he'd be stupid to refuse. He leaves you alone, stops pursuing your family, and walks away clean. In exchange, this folder stays locked in my safe and never sees the light of day." Lorenzo's smile was sharp as a blade. "It's more mercy than he deserves, but it's practical." "What if he doesn't accept?" "Then I'd destroy him." There was no bravado in Lorenzo's voice, just cold certainty. "I'll release every piece of evidence to multiple sources simultaneously. The FBI, investigative journalists, even his competitors who'd love to see him fall. By the time I'm done, Vincent Costello won't have a business, a reputation, or his freedom. He'll spend the rest of his life in a federal prison, if he's lucky. If he's not lucky, his enemies will find him first." The casual way Lorenzo described destroying another man's life should have frightened Isabella. Instead, she felt something close to relief. For the first time since Vincent Costello had entered her life, someone was offering her real protection, backed by real power. "When will you approach him?" "Tomorrow. I'll request a meeting, just the 2 of us, somewhere neutral. I'll lay out the situation and give him 24 hours to decide. In the meantime, you stay here where it's safe." A thought occurred to Isabella, uncomfortable but necessary. What if he tries to hurt you, to eliminate the threat you represent? Lorenzo's laugh was genuinely amused. Vincent can certainly try, but I don't make threats I can't back up, and I don't put myself in situations I haven't already wargamed a dozen ways. If something happens to me, that folder gets released automatically. Vincent's smart enough to know that. You've thought of everything. I've learned to. Lorenzo checked his watch. It's almost 4. You should eat something more substantial than soup. Natasha's preparing dinner for 6. I'd like you to join me if you're comfortable with that. It was phrased as a request, but Isabella heard the underlying expectation. Lorenzo was used to being in control, to having his suggestions followed as orders. Another red flag in a situation already full of them. But what choice did she have? She was a fugitive in a borrowed room, dependent on the kindness of a dangerous stranger who apparently collected information on crime bosses for breakfast. "I'll be there," she said. Lorenzo nodded, already turning his attention to the papers on his desk, clearly dismissing her. Isabella turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Mr. Vale?" He looked up, one eyebrow raised in question. "Why do you hate men like Vincent so much? What did someone do to make you build files on them? Wait for chances to take them down?" For a long moment, Lorenzo was silent, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "Someone I cared about was hurt by a man who thought he owned her. I wasn't able to protect her then. I was young, powerless, and by the time I had the resources to do something about it, it was too late. She was already gone." He paused, something dark and painful crossing his features. "I can't save her, but I can save others. So that's what I do." The raw honesty in his words stole Isabella's breath. She wanted to ask more, to know the whole story, but the look in Lorenzo's eyes told her the conversation was over. Some wounds were too deep to probe, especially with strangers. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me that, for helping me." "Don't thank me yet, Miss Romano. We still have a long way to go, and Vincent Costello doesn't give up easily. The real battle hasn't even started." Isabella left the study with those words echoing in her mind. She wandered the mansion's halls, trying to orient herself to what might be her home for days or weeks to come. The house was massive, elegantly furnished but somehow impersonal, as if Lorenzo lived here but didn't truly inhabit the space. There were no family photos, no personal touches, just expensive art and furniture that could have come from a catalog. She found herself in what appeared to be a library, 2 stories of books accessible by a rolling ladder. The selection was eclectic: classic literature next to modern thrillers, philosophy beside true crime, technical manuals on security systems sharing shelf space with poetry collections. It was the most personal room she'd seen, and she wondered if Lorenzo spent much time here. "He reads before bed," Natasha's voice came from the doorway, making Isabella jump. "Every night, at least an hour, sometimes more if he can't sleep, which is often." "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding. This is your home now, for as long as you need it to be." Natasha entered the library, running her fingers along a shelf with obvious affection. "Mr. Vale is a complicated man, but he's a good one. He saved my life. I think he's saving yours too." "What happened to you?" Isabella asked. "If you don't mind me asking." Natasha was quiet for a moment, her expression distant. "I came to America as a domestic worker for a diplomat. I thought it would be a good opportunity, a way to send money home to my family. But the diplomat, he thought because he paid my wages, he owned all of me. When I refused his advances, he became violent. He broke my ribs, told me he'd have me deported if I complained, that no one would believe me over a man of his standing. How did Lorenzo find you?" "I found him," Natasha corrected. "I'd heard rumors about a man who helped people in impossible situations, who had the power to stand up to powerful men. I showed up at his gate, bleeding and terrified, and he took me in. Within a week, the diplomat was recalled to his home country under mysterious circumstances. Within a month, I had legal residency and a job here. Mr. Vale never asked for anything in return except that I be honest with him and follow his security rules." Isabella absorbed this, another piece of the Lorenzo Vale puzzle clicking into place. "How many others has he helped?" "I don't know the exact number, but I know there are at least 5 other women working on this estate who have similar stories, And I know that Mr. Vale has connections to several organizations that help trafficking victims, abuse survivors, people trying to escape dangerous situations. He funds them quietly, never takes credit. Natasha smiled. Like I said, complicated but good. Before Isabella could respond, her phone, still in the pocket of her ruined wedding dress back in her room, began to ring. She'd forgotten she even had it. The sound was muffled but unmistakable. Don't answer it, Natasha said immediately. Any call right now is either Vincent's people or your father trying to track you. I know. But Isabella found herself walking back to her room anyway, pulled by morbid curiosity. When she pulled the phone from the dress pocket, the screen showed 17 missed calls. 10 from her father, 7 from a number she didn't recognize but could guess belonged to Vincent. There were also text messages, dozens of them, most from her father, increasingly desperate. Bella, please come home. You're making a terrible mistake. Vincent just wants to help you. Your mother is worried sick. How could you do this to us? The messages from the unknown number were worse, colder. You can't hide forever, Isabella. I'll find you. It's only a matter of time. When I do, you'll learn what happens to women who embarrass me. Your mother sends her love. She hopes you'll do the right thing. The last message had been sent less than an hour ago, and it made Isabella's blood run cold. Tick-tock, little bride. The clock is running. She must have made a sound because suddenly Natasha was there, gently taking the phone from her shaking hands. Come on, let's get you away from this. Dinner will be ready soon. But Isabella couldn't move, couldn't stop staring at that last message. Vincent's words felt like a physical threat, reaching through the phone to wrap around her throat like his hands might have if she'd gone through with the wedding. He's not going to stop, she whispered. Even if Lorenzo pays the debt, even if he threatens him with evidence, Vincent's not going to let this go. He can't. His reputation depends on making an example of me. Then Mr. Vale will make an example of him first, Natasha said with quiet conviction. You'll see. Tomorrow, when they meet, everything will change. Isabella wanted to believe her, desperately, but she'd learned the hard way that powerful men rarely faced real consequences for their actions. They always found a way to win, to turn situations to their advantage, to make the vulnerable pay for their own victimization. As she followed Natasha down to dinner, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm was still coming, and that when it hit, even Lorenzo Val's considerable power might not be enough to protect her. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20 but felt intimate with just the two of them at one end of the long table. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over plates of pasta, grilled vegetables, and fresh bread that filled the room with the kind of comfortable domestic smells Isabella hadn't experienced in years. Natasha had outdone herself, and Isabella suspected it was deliberate, an attempt to create normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. Lorenzo sat across from her, having changed into a dark sweater that made him look slightly less intimidating than the business attire, though his presence still dominated the space. He ate with the same controlled precision he seemed to apply to everything, and Isabella found herself studying him between bites, trying to understand the man who'd become her unexpected protector. "You're staring," Lorenzo said without looking up from his plate. Isabella flushed, but didn't look away. "I'm trying to figure you out. You don't fit any category, I know." "Good. Categories are dangerous. They make people predictable." He finally met her eyes, and there was something almost amused in his expression. "What have you concluded so far?" "That you're wealthy but not ostentatious, powerful but careful about how you use it. You help people, but you're not doing it for recognition or gratitude." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "And you've been hurt badly enough that you've built your entire life around making sure others don't suffer the same way." Lorenzo's fork paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment, his carefully controlled mask slipped, and Isabella saw something raw underneath. Old pain, carefully buried but never truly healed. "That's remarkably perceptive for someone who's known me less than 48 hours, he said quietly. "I've gotten good at reading people. It's a survival skill when you grow up in a house where moods can turn violent without warning." Isabella set down her own fork, her appetite fading as memories surfaced. "My father never hit me, but he hit my mother. And the threat was always there, hanging over everything. You learn to watch, to anticipate, to see the signs before the storm breaks. I'm sorry you had to learn that." Are you? Sorry, I mean, or is that just something people say? The question came out sharper than she'd intended, but Isabella was tired of polite fictions. Everyone's always sorry about other people's pain, but sorry doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo the damage or prevent it from happening again. Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark, assessing eyes. You're right. Sorry is useless without action. So, no, I'm not sorry in the way people usually mean it. But I am determined to make sure your past doesn't become your future. That's more useful than sympathy. Is that what happened to you? Did someone fail to turn their sympathy into action? The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Isabella thought he wouldn't answer, that she'd pushed too far too fast. But then Lorenzo spoke, his voice low and controlled, as if he were reciting facts from a file rather than his own history. I grew up in a neighborhood where power meant everything and weakness got you killed. My father was a small-time operator, protection rackets, loan sharking, nothing major but enough to keep us comfortable. I watched him build relationships through fear and violence, saw how he treated the people who owed him money or depended on his protection. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. When I was 17, I fell in love with a girl named Sophia. She was beautiful, smart, everything I wasn't. Her father owed mine money, and my father decided the debt could be forgiven if Sophia married me. A business arrangement, like your father tried to force on you. Isabella's chest constricted. She knew where this story was going, could feel the tragedy building in Lorenzo's carefully measured words. Sophia didn't want to marry me. She was in love with someone else, some college boy from a good family who could give her the life she deserved. But her father was desperate, terrified of what mine would do if the debt wasn't paid, so she agreed, and Lorenzo's voice hardened. I was young and stupid and convinced myself that she'd learn to love me, that I could make her happy through sheer force of will. I told myself I was saving her from a worse fate, that any other collector would have been crueler. What happened? Isabella asked, though part of her didn't want to know. We were engaged for 3 months. I tried everything, gifts, attention, promises of a better life. But you can't force love, and Sophia grew more miserable every day. I could see it destroying her, but I was too selfish and too proud to let her go. Lorenzo's hands clenched on the table. The night before our wedding, she took every pill in her mother's medicine cabinet and went to sleep. By the time they found her the next morning, it was too late. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. She'd expected tragedy, but this was devastating in its quiet brutality. She stopped herself, remembering his words about useless sympathy. That must have broken something in you. It broke everything, Lorenzo said flatly. I realized I'd become exactly like my father, using power to control people, convincing myself it was for their own good. Sophia's death taught me that there's no such thing as benevolent control. Either people have agency or they don't. Either you respect their choices or you destroy them trying to make them into what you want. So you left that life. I burned it to the ground. There was grim satisfaction in Lorenzo's voice. I turned evidence on my father's entire operation, put him and his associates in prison, and rebuilt myself into something different, something better, I hope. But I've never forgotten the lesson Sophia taught me with her death, that protecting people means giving them choices, not making choices for them. Isabella understood now why Lorenzo had been so careful to frame everything as her decision, why he'd offered her the option to leave even as he provided protection. He was trying to atone for a sin he'd committed at 17, trying to save every Sophia he encountered to make up for the one he'd destroyed. That's why you help women escaping dangerous men, she said. Why you've built files on people like Vincent. You're trying to prevent other Sophias. Yes, the single word carried the weight of 20 years of penance. They sat in silence for a long moment, the food forgotten, the elegant dining room suddenly feeling too large and too empty. Isabella wanted to offer comfort but didn't know how. What could you say to someone carrying that kind of guilt? She made her own choice, Isabella said finally. It was the wrong choice, a permanent solution to a temporary problem, but it was hers. You can't take responsibility for that. Can't I? Lorenzo's smile was bitter. If I'd let her go, if I'd been strong enough to refuse my father's arrangement and face the consequences, she'd still be alive. Her death is on me, Isabella. I've made my peace with that. What I haven't made peace with is the idea of it happening again when I have the power to prevent it. Is that all I am to you? The question escaped before Isabella could stop it. Another chance at redemption? Another Sophia you're trying to save? Lorenzo's eyes snapped to hers, sharp and intense. You're not Sophia. You're not a ghost I'm trying to resurrect or a past mistake I'm trying to correct. You're a woman who deserves safety and agency, and I happen to be in a position to provide both. Don't diminish yourself by thinking you're only important to me as a symbol. The fierce conviction in his voice sent warmth through Isabella's chest, unexpected and unsettling. She'd been alone for so long, fighting her own battles, that having someone fight for her felt almost alien. Dangerous, too, because it would be so easy to become dependent on Lorenzo's protection, to trade her father's cage for a gilded one. Before she could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression tight. We have a situation. Lorenzo was on his feet instantly. All previous vulnerability vanished behind a mask of cold professionalism. What kind of situation? Two cars just approached the perimeter fence on the east side. They're not making any aggressive moves, just sitting there with their headlights on. Message is clear. They know she's here. Isabella's blood turned to ice. How could they possibly know? They don't know for certain, Lorenzo said, his voice calm despite the tension crackling through the room. They're fishing, testing to see if I react. Vincent's covering his bases, checking every property owned by anyone who might have resources to hide you. He turned to Marcus. How many men in the vehicles? 4 that we can see. Could be more. Armed? Assume so. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. Double the gate security. I want eyes on those cars 24/7 until they move. And get me a list of every license plate, every face you can identify. I want to know exactly who Vincent sent. Marcus nodded and disappeared. Lorenzo turned back to Isabella, and despite his calm exterior, she could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the warrior assessing threats and planning responses. This doesn't change anything, he said. You're safe here. Those cars can sit out there until they run out of gas for all I care. They can't breach this property without triggering alarms and facing armed response. But they know I'm here. Isabella's voice was shaking, the brief sense of safety she'd begun to feel crumbling. Vincent knows, or at least suspects strongly enough to send people. What's to stop him from calling the police, claiming I'm being held against my will? Because he can't risk the publicity or the questions that would come with it. If police get involved, they'll want to talk to you, hear your side of the story. You'll tell them about the arranged marriage, the coercion, the bruises on your neck and wrists. Vincent's carefully constructed narrative about a mentally unstable bride falls apart the moment you start talking. Lorenzo moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring despite the crisis unfolding. He needs to retrieve you quietly, make it look like you came back willingly. That's why he's out there testing the waters rather than storming the gates. What about my mother? If he knows I'm here, he'll use her as leverage, yes. That was always going to be his play. Lorenzo pulled out his phone and made a quick call. It's time to accelerate our timeline. I'm moving the meeting with Vincent to tonight. Tonight? Isabella's heart lurched. Is that safe? Safety is relative. But the longer we wait, the more time Vincent has to plan, to position his people, to hurt your mother to draw you out. Better to confront him now, on my terms, before he can escalate further. Lorenzo was already moving toward the door, his phone to his ear. Natasha will stay with you. Don't leave this house under any circumstances. If something happens to me, don't, Isabella interrupted, fear clawing at her throat. Don't talk like something's going to happen to you. Lorenzo paused, turning back to look at her. In the chandelier light, his features were all sharp edges and shadows, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. I don't plan on anything happening to me, but I didn't survive this long by failing to plan for contingencies. If something does happen, Marcus has instructions to get you to a safe house. You'll have money, new identification, everything you need to start over somewhere Vincent can't find you. And my mother? Will be extracted regardless of what happens to me. I've already arranged for that. He crossed back to her, and before Isabella could process what was happening, he'd taken her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses she could feel on his palms. Listen to me very carefully. No matter what you hear tonight, no matter what Vincent might claim or what rumors start spreading, you stay in this house where you're protected. Don't make the mistake of trying to sacrifice yourself for your mother. It won't save her, and it will destroy any chance we have of stopping Vincent permanently. Isabella wanted to argue, to insist she couldn't sit safely while he walked into danger on her behalf, but the intensity in Lorenzo's dark eyes told her that arguing would be pointless. He'd made his decision, and nothing she said would change it. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered instead. "I'm always careful." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, a gesture so unexpectedly tender that it stole her breath. "I have something to come back to now." Then he was gone, moving through the house with Marcus at his side, their voices low and urgent as they planned for the confrontation ahead. Isabella stood alone in the dining room, her heart hammering, her skin still tingling where Lorenzo had touched her face. Natasha appeared moments later, her expression grim but determined. "Come on, we'll wait in the security room. You can watch everything from there." "Watch what?" "Mr. Vale's meeting with Costello. He'll be wearing a camera and microphone. You'll see and hear everything that happens." Isabella followed Natasha through a maze of hallways to a door that required both a key card and a fingerprint to open. Beyond it was a room that looked like something from a spy movie, multiple screens showing different camera angles of the estate, computer terminals, communication equipment, and two technicians who barely glanced up as they entered. "Mr. Vale's feed will come through on monitor 3, one of them said, pointing to a large central screen. "Audio's already live." Isabella could hear Lorenzo's voice through the speakers, giving instructions to his security team as he prepared to leave the estate. She watched on another monitor as he climbed into an armored vehicle, Marcus in the driver's seat, two more armed men in the back. "Where are they meeting?" Isabella asked. "Neutral ground. An old warehouse in the industrial district that Mr. Vale owns. It's been swept for weapons and recording devices. Vincent will bring his own security, but there are rules for this kind of meeting, limited numbers, no ambushes, or else the whole system of negotiation between powerful men breaks down." Natasha settled into a chair beside Isabella, her hand finding Isabella's and squeezing gently. "Mr. Vale has done this before. He knows how to handle men like Costello." The armored vehicle pulled through the estate gates and onto the main road. Through Lorenzo's camera, Isabella watched the city pass by, familiar streets made strange by the knowledge of what was coming. The two cars that had been watching the property pulled out to follow at a distance, and Isabella's stomach churned with anxiety. "They're tailing him," she said. "We know. That's expected." One of the technicians adjusted something on his console. "Mr. Vale's route will take them through 3 different security checkpoints, where our people can monitor and intervene if necessary. And the warehouse itself is fortified. Costello can't pull anything without facing immediate consequences." Isabella wanted to believe him, but fear had taken root in her chest and was growing with every mile Lorenzo traveled toward this confrontation. She kept thinking about Sophia, about the girl who died rather than live under someone else's control, about the guilt Lorenzo had carried for 2 decades because of one choice made when he was too young to fully understand its weight. What if tonight was the night that guilt got him killed? What if Vincent proved more dangerous or more desperate than Lorenzo anticipated? What if she lost the one person who'd shown her genuine protection without demanding something in return? The vehicle pulled into an industrial area, all abandoned factories and empty lots, and stopped in front of a squat brick building. Through the camera, Isabella watched Lorenzo and his team exit the vehicle and enter the warehouse. The interior was sparse, exposed brick walls, concrete floor, a single table with 2 chairs positioned in the center under harsh fluorescent lights. It looked like a scene from a crime movie, and the reality of what was happening hit Isabella with fresh force. This was her life now. Not romantic dinners or safe routines, but dangerous men meeting in warehouses to negotiate her fate like she was property to be traded rather than a person with agency. "He's here!" Marcus's voice came through the speakers. 3 cars, Costello and 6 men. "Let him bring 2 inside," Lorenzo's voice responded, calm as if he were discussing the weather. "The rest stay with the vehicles, same as our arrangement." Through the camera, Isabella watched Vincent Costello enter the warehouse. Even on screen, he radiated predatory confidence, his expensive suit and styled hair at odds with the industrial setting. He was handsome in a sharp, cruel way, and seeing him again made Isabella's skin crawl with remembered fear. Two of Vincent's men flanked him, thick-necked enforcers with dead eyes and poorly concealed weapons. They took up positions behind Vincent as he settled into the chair across from Lorenzo with the casual arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Lorenzo Vale," Vincent said, his voice smooth and cultured. "I wondered when you'd stick your nose into my business. Though I admit, I didn't expect you to be stupid enough to steal from me." "I haven't stolen anything," Lorenzo replied, his tone matching Vincent's for calm control. "I've provided sanctuary to a woman fleeing coercion. There's a difference." Vincent's laugh was cold. "Sanctuary? Is that what you're calling harboring my fiancée? The woman who ran out on our wedding, humiliated me in front of 300 guests, and caused significant damage to my reputation and business relationships? Your fiancée made a choice. She chose freedom over a forced marriage to a man with a documented history of violence against women. I respect her choice, and I'm prepared to ensure she has the resources to maintain it. She's not in a position to make choices." Vincent leaned forward, his eyes glittering with barely suppressed rage. "Her father owes me money. That debt creates an obligation, one that Isabella agreed to fulfill by accepting my proposal and planning a wedding. Running away doesn't erase debts or obligations, Vale. It just adds new ones." "About that debt," Lorenzo said smoothly, "I've taken the liberty of paying it off. Every dollar Antonio Romano owed you, plus the interest you so generously calculated. The transfer completed this afternoon. Your leverage is gone, Vincent. Let it go." For the first time, Vincent's composure cracked, fury darkening his features. "You paid! You had no right! That debt was mine. The arrangement was mine. Isabella is mine." "Isabella Romano is a human being with agency, not property to be owned." Lorenzo's voice hardened, steel beneath the silk. "And I have every right to pay any debt I choose to pay. The money's in your account. Take it and walk away. That's the smart play here." Vincent stood abruptly, his chair scraping against concrete. "You think money solves this? You think you can just buy her from me like I'm some common criminal?" "I think I'm offering you an opportunity to exit this situation with your finances intact and your operations uninterrupted. What happens next depends entirely on how reasonable you choose to be." "Reasonable?" Vincent's voice rose, his careful control slipping. "I was humiliated, made a fool of in front of everyone who matters in this city. Do you understand what that does to a man's reputation, to his business? I can't just let her walk away. I can't let you interfere. It sets a precedent I can't afford." "Then let me set a different precedent." Lorenzo opened the folder he'd brought and slid several photographs across the table. Even through the camera, Isabella could see they were surveillance photos. Vincent meeting with known criminals, entering buildings connected to illegal operations, his face clear and damning. "This is a small sample of what I have on you. Financial records proving money laundering. Testimony from 3 women who'll swear you assaulted them. Phone records connecting you to the murder of Thomas Chen last year, the one the police still think was a robbery gone wrong. And evidence of your involvement in a trafficking operation that moves girls as young as 15. Vincent had gone very still, his face draining of color as he stared at the photographs. "You're bluffing." "I never bluff. I have enough evidence to put you away for multiple life sentences. The only reason you're not already in a federal prison is because I've chosen not to use it. Yet." Lorenzo gathered the photos back into the folder with deliberate care. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to forget Isabella Romano exists. You're going to release her mother from your estate unharmed. You're going to accept the payment of the debt and consider all obligations fulfilled. And in exchange, this folder stays locked in my safe, and you continue your operations without federal interference. And if I refuse," Vincent's voice was tight with barely controlled rage, "then I release everything simultaneously to the FBI, the State Attorney General, 3 investigative journalists I trust, and several of your competitors who would love to see you destroyed. By tomorrow morning, you'll be in custody, your assets frozen, your people scattered. By next week, you'll be in a cell awaiting trial on charges that carry mandatory minimum sentences of 25 years to life." Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, utterly relaxed despite the tension crackling through the warehouse. But I'm betting you're smarter than that. I'm betting you understand that one woman, no matter how beautiful, no matter how much her escape wounded your pride, isn't worth losing your freedom, your empire, and quite possibly your life when your enemies smell blood in the water. The silence stretched between them, thick and dangerous. Isabella held her breath, watching Vincent's face as he calculated odds and consequences. His hands were clenched on the table, his jaw tight with fury, but she could see the moment his pragmatism won over his pride. "You're making an enemy here, Vale," Vincent said quietly, and the threat in his voice was unmistakable. "Today you have leverage. Tomorrow, circumstances might change, and when they do, I'll remember this conversation. I'll remember how you humiliated me, stole from me, threatened me, and I'll collect on that debt with interest." "I look forward to your attempt," Lorenzo said with dark amusement. "But for now, do we have an agreement? Isabella stays under my protection, her mother is released, and we both go back to our respective lives without further interference?" Vincent stood slowly, his movements controlled despite the rage radiating from every line of his body. "We have an agreement. But Vale, this isn't over, not by a long shot." "It's over when I say it's over," Lorenzo replied, still seated, still calm. "And right now, I'm saying it's over. Take the win I'm offering you. Your operations continue, your freedom remains intact, and all it costs you is letting go of one woman who never wanted you in the first place. That's a bargain by any measure." Vincent turned and walked toward the door, his two enforcers falling into step behind him. At the threshold, he paused and looked back, and the expression on his face made Isabella's blood run cold, even through the camera feed. "Tell Isabella I hope her new protector proves more durable than her courage," Vincent said softly. "Because when he falls, and they always fall eventually, I'll be waiting, and there won't be anyone left to hide behind." Then he was gone, and Isabella heard the warehouse door slam with a finality that should have felt like victory, but instead felt like a staid execution, temporary reprieve from an inevitable reckoning. Isabella's hands were shaking as Lorenzo's vehicle pulled back through the estate gates an hour later. She'd watched the entire confrontation on the monitor, heard every word, seen the barely controlled violence in Vincent's eyes when he'd made his final threat. The meeting had gone as well as could be expected. Vincent had agreed to the terms. Her mother would be released, but the promise of future retaliation hung over everything like a storm cloud. "He's going to come after you," Isabella said the moment Lorenzo entered the security room. "Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. He won't let this go." "I know." Lorenzo's voice was calm, but Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightness around his eyes that suggested the meeting had cost him more than he wanted to admit. "But eventually gives us time to build stronger defenses, to gather more evidence, to make it even more costly for him to act. That's all we can ask for in situations like this, time and preparation." "That's not enough." Isabella stood, her fear transmuting into anger. "You risked everything for me tonight. You put yourself directly in Vincent's crosshairs, made yourself a target, and for what? A stranger you found hiding in your car 2 days ago?" "You're not a stranger anymore." Lorenzo's eyes met hers, dark and intense. "And I didn't risk everything. I risked exactly what I was willing to lose, with full knowledge of the potential consequences. That was my choice, Isabella, my agency. You don't get to take responsibility for it." The words hit harder than they should have, an echo of what she'd said to him earlier about Sophia's death. He was right, of course. She couldn't own his choices any more than he could own hers. But that didn't make it easier to accept that someone had put themselves in danger for her sake. Before she could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Update on the mother. Costello's people released her 30 minutes ago, dropped her at her home, unharmed. We have surveillance confirming she's safe." Relief flooded through Isabella so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. "Can I see her? Talk to her?" "Not yet," Lorenzo said gently. "Your father's home is almost certainly being monitored. Any contact you make can be traced, and we can't risk Vincent having a pretext to claim we violated the agreement. Give it a few days, let things settle, then we'll arrange a secure meeting." "A few days," Isabella repeated numbly. Her mother was free, safe, but still untouchable. still separated by the invisible walls of Vincent's surveillance and her father's complicity. What about my father? Is he still at your parents' home, probably drinking himself into a stupor over the debt being paid off by an anonymous benefactor and his daughter still missing? Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, without judgment. We're monitoring him too, just in case Costello tries to use him to get to you. Isabella sank back into her chair, exhaustion washing over her in waves. 2 days ago, she'd been a bride fleeing a forced marriage. Now she was the center of a power struggle between dangerous men, her family under surveillance, her future uncertain at best. The weight of it all felt crushing. You should rest, Lorenzo said, and there was unexpected gentleness in his tone. It's been a long day, and tomorrow we'll need to start planning next steps. Next steps? Isabella echoed. You mean figuring out how long I need to hide here before Vincent decides to break your agreement? I mean figuring out what kind of life you want to build now that you're free to choose. Lorenzo extended his hand to help her up. Vincent agreed to leave you alone. Whether he keeps that agreement long-term is a separate question, but for now you have breathing room. Time to decide who you want to be and what you want to do, without your father's debts or Vincent's threats hanging over you. Isabella took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm, steady, and she found herself not wanting to let go. Over the past 2 days, Lorenzo had become an anchor in the chaos, someone whose presence made her feel less alone even when everything else was falling apart. I don't even know where to start, she admitted. I've spent so long just surviving, just trying to make it through each day without making things worse. The idea of actually choosing a future feels impossible. Then start small. Choose what you want for breakfast tomorrow. Choose what you want to read or watch or do with your time. Small choices build into bigger ones. Lorenzo's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so subtle she might have imagined it. You have time, Isabella. Use it. Natasha appeared to escort her back to her room, but Isabella found herself reluctant to leave Lorenzo's presence. There was something unfinished between them, words hovering unspoken in the air. Thank you, she said finally, for everything. For protecting me, for confronting Vincent, for giving me a choice when everyone else just wanted to decide for me. You don't need to thank me. Lorenzo's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow. Isabella followed Natasha through the quiet hallways, her mind replaying the confrontation in the warehouse. The cold fury in Vincent's voice when he'd promised retribution. The absolute calm in Lorenzo's response, as if he faced down dangerous men threatening his life every day and found it merely tedious rather than terrifying. Who was Lorenzo Valle, really? Every answer she got spawned 3 new questions, and Isabella was beginning to suspect that the mystery was intentional. Layers of protection built around a core of something precious and vulnerable that he couldn't afford to let anyone see. Sleep came easier than Isabella expected, exhaustion finally overwhelming anxiety. She dreamed of running through endless corridors, chased by shadows that whispered threats in Vincent's voice, until she burst through a door and found herself in a garden bathed in golden light. Lorenzo was there, standing among flowers she couldn't name, and when he turned to her, his face was open and unguarded in a way she'd never seen while awake. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee drifting up from somewhere below. For a moment, she forgot where she was, expected to see the familiar walls of her childhood bedroom, or worse, Vincent's estate where she'd have woken up if she'd gone through with the wedding. Then reality settled in. She was safe, in Lorenzo's mansion, and for the first time in months, she had nothing she was required to do. The freedom was almost disorienting. Isabella found her way to a sunroom overlooking the estate's gardens, where Natasha had set out breakfast in fresh clothes. The casual domesticity of it felt surreal, like playing house in someone else's life. Mr. Vale is in meetings this morning, Natasha said, pouring coffee. But he asked me to tell you that you're free to explore the grounds, if you'd like. The gardens are lovely this time of year, and the fresh air might do you good. Is it safe? To go outside, I mean. The entire property is secured. Cameras, motion sensors, armed guards at every entrance. You could walk to the fence line and back without anyone unauthorized getting within 100 yards of you. Natasha smiled. Mr. Vale doesn't take chances with people under his protection. After breakfast, Isabella did exactly that. She wandered through gardens that were clearly professionally maintained, all manicured hedges and carefully planned flower beds. There was a greenhouse tucked into one corner, its glass panels catching the morning sun. Inside, she found more plants than she could name, and the humid warmth was like stepping into another world. Beautiful, isn't it? Isabella spun to find Lorenzo standing in the greenhouse doorway, dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray sweater. He looked younger like this, less intimidating without the suits and controlled atmosphere of his office. "I didn't know you were a gardener," Isabella said. "I'm not, really, but I like growing things, watching them develop from seeds into something whole and thriving. It's a counterbalance to the rest of my work, which tends to involve things falling apart rather than coming together." Lorenzo moved through the greenhouse with familiarity, checking plants, adjusting irrigation lines. "This is where I come when I need to think, to center myself. There's something honest about plants. They either thrive or they die based on how well you care for them. No politics, no hidden agendas." Isabella watched him work, fascinated by this glimpse of the man behind the protective walls. "Do you spend a lot of time here?" "More than I probably should. Marcus jokes that I've turned into some kind of armed hermit, hoarding plants and files instead of human connections." Lorenzo paused over a flowering orchid, his expression distant. "He's not entirely wrong." "Why hermit? You have staff, security, people who clearly respect and trust you." "Respect and trust aren't the same as intimacy." Lorenzo's voice was quiet. "I've spent 20 years building walls, Isabella, protecting myself from vulnerability, from the kind of pain that comes when you let someone matter and then lose them. It's effective, but lonely." The honesty in his words created a fragile moment between them, like something crystalline that could shatter with the wrong breath. Isabella found herself moving closer, drawn by the rare vulnerability in his expression. "Is that why you help people like me?" she asked. "Because it's safer than actually connecting with someone? You get to be the hero, solve the problem, then send them on their way before they can get close enough to hurt you?" Lorenzo's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "Maybe. Probably. I haven't examined my motivations too closely because I'm not sure I'd like what I found." He finally met her eyes, and the raw honesty there stole her breath. "But with you, it's different. You're not just another person to save and forget. You've gotten under my skin in ways I didn't anticipate." "Is that a problem?" Isabella's heart was hammering now, the air between them charged with something electric and dangerous. "I don't know yet." Lorenzo reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with devastating gentleness. "All I know is that when Vincent threatened you last night, when he promised to come after you when I fall, my first thought wasn't about strategy or evidence or leverage. It was about making sure that never happens, no matter what it costs me. That's not professional detachment, Isabella. That's something else entirely." "What if I don't want professional detachment?" The words escaped before Isabella could think them through. "What if I want—" Lorenzo's phone rang, shattering the moment. He pulled back with visible reluctance, checking the screen and frowning. "I need to take this. It's my contact at the FBI." He stepped outside the greenhouse, and Isabella could hear his voice through the glass panels, professional and controlled once more. The walls had gone back up, and she felt the loss of that brief vulnerability like a physical ache. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "We have a complication." "What kind of complication?" "Vincent filed a missing persons report with the police this morning. He's claiming you're mentally unstable and potentially suicidal, that he's concerned for your safety. It's a calculated move. If you surface and contradict his narrative, you look like you're lying to cover embarrassment. If you stay hidden, it reinforces his story that you're unstable and possibly in danger." Isabella felt ice flooding through her veins. "He's trying to force my hand. Make me come forward and defend myself, which means revealing where I am." "Exactly. And he's leveraging his political connections to make sure the missing person case gets priority attention. By tomorrow, your photo will be all over local news, social media, everywhere. The public will be looking for you, which makes it exponentially harder to move you anywhere or keep you hidden long term." "So what do we do?" Lorenzo was silent for a long moment, his mind clearly racing through options and contingencies. "We could go public ourselves, have you make a statement about the forced marriage and your reasons for leaving. But that opens you up to media scrutiny, public judgment, and it gives Vincent opportunities to shape the narrative in ways that hurt you. Or we wait. Let Vincent's missing person report run its course while you stay safely hidden here. Eventually, when no body turns up and no evidence of foul play surfaces, the investigation will go cold. It might take weeks or months, but public attention is fleeting. This will stop being news, and when it does, we'll have more room to maneuver. Weeks or months of hiding. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the greenhouse warmth. Weeks or months of my mother thinking I'm missing or dead, of strangers searching for me, of Vincent playing the concerned fiancé on television. I know it's not ideal, but it keeps you safe and alive, which are my primary concerns right now. What about your concerns? Isabella challenged. A few minutes ago, you said I'd gotten under your skin, that keeping me safe was personal. Now you're talking about hiding me away for months like I'm just another problem to manage. Lorenzo's expression hardened, defensive walls slamming back into place. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. I can care about you and still make strategic decisions about your safety. In fact, caring about you makes those decisions even more critical. Strategic decisions, Isabella repeated bitterly. Is that all I am to you? A series of strategic decisions wrapped in personal feelings you're too scared to actually act on? You don't know what you're asking. Lorenzo's voice was tight, controlled in a way that suggested he was fighting to maintain composure. You want me to what exactly? Confess feelings I barely understand myself? Act on attraction that could compromise both our safety? You've been under my protection for 3 days, Isabella. 3 days. That's not enough time to build something real. It's just proximity and adrenaline and what? Isabella stepped closer, refusing to let him retreat behind his walls. You felt it too just now, something real, something that scared you enough to pull away the second your phone gave you an excuse. Don't tell me it's just proximity and adrenaline when I can see in your eyes that you're lying to yourself as much as you're lying to me. The silence stretched between them, taut and crackling with everything unsaid. Lorenzo's hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight, and Isabella could see the war happening behind his eyes. The parts of him that wanted to reach for her battling the parts that had spent 2 decades learning not to want anything he could lose. You're right, he said finally, his voice rough. I am scared. Terrified, if I'm being honest. Because everyone I've ever cared about has either been destroyed by my world or has destroyed me from the inside out. Sophia died because I couldn't let her go. My parents hate me for turning evidence against my father. The few friends I had growing up chose loyalty to the old neighborhood over loyalty to me when I went legitimate. I've learned that caring about people is a liability I can't afford. And yet you built a household full of people you've saved, staff who are loyal to you, a security team that would walk through fire for you. You're surrounded by people who care about you, Lorenzo. You're not as alone as you pretend to be. They care about what I can do for them, what I represent. That's not the same as... He stopped, shaking his head. This is a pointless conversation. What matters right now is keeping you safe, not analyzing why I'm emotionally unavailable. It's not pointless to me. Isabella reached out, her hand finding his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. You told me yesterday that I had agency, that I got to make my own choices. Well, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing to care about you despite the danger, despite the complications, despite every logical reason why I shouldn't. You don't get to take that choice away from me because you're scared. Lorenzo's hand came up to cover hers, his grip tight. You have no idea what you're choosing. The world I live in, the enemies I've made, the darkness I carry. It's not something you just decide to wade into because you feel grateful for protection or attracted to danger. I'm not grateful and I'm not attracted to danger. I'm attracted to you, the man who grows orchids to balance out the violence in his life, the man who's carried guilt for 20 years over something that wasn't his fault, the man who risks everything for strangers because he understands what it means to be powerless. Isabella's voice softened. I see you, Lorenzo, not the strategic operator or the dangerous protector. I see the person underneath all that armor, and I want to know him better. For a moment, she thought he might pull away, might retreat behind his walls and end this conversation with cold professionalism. But then something shifted in his expression, a crack in the facade, and he was pulling her closer, his free hand cupping her face with a tenderness that contradicted everything about his reputation. You're going to ruin me, he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. You're going to crack open every defense I've built and make me vulnerable again, and I'm going to let you because I can't seem to help myself." "Good," Isabella breathed. "I want you vulnerable. I want you real. I want—" His mouth found hers, cutting off words with a kiss that was both gentle and desperate, like a man who'd been starving and finally found sustenance. Isabella's hands fisted in his sweater, pulling him closer, and for a perfect, crystalline moment, nothing else existed. Not Vincent's threats, not the complications of their situation, not the uncertain future. Just this, just them, just the terrifying honesty of two damaged people choosing to reach for each other, despite every reason not to. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo's eyes held something Isabella hadn't seen there before. Hope, fragile and new and terrifying in its vulnerability. "This is a terrible idea," he said, but he was smiling, really smiling, and it transformed his whole face. "Probably," Isabella agreed, "but I'm done with good ideas that make me miserable. I'd rather try a terrible idea that makes me happy. Even if happiness is temporary? Even if this all falls apart in spectacular fashion? Even then." Isabella's fingers traced the line of his jaw, memorizing the feel of him. "My whole life has been about avoiding risk, playing it safe, doing what I was told. And where did that get me? Barefoot in a wedding dress, running for my life. Maybe it's time to try something different." Lorenzo captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You should know what you're getting into. My enemies become your enemies. My isolation becomes your isolation. The danger I live with becomes danger you live with. That's not a metaphor, Isabella. That's reality. I know, and I'm choosing it anyway. I'm choosing you." The words seemed to break something open in Lorenzo, some final resistance crumbling. He pulled her close again, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the world through sheer force of will. "Then we'll figure it out," he murmured against her hair. "Together. No more strategic decisions that leave you in the dark. No more pretending this is just about protection. We'll build something real, whatever that looks like, and we'll defend it against whoever tries to take it away." Isabella sank into his embrace, letting herself feel safe in a way that had nothing to do with armed guards or security systems. This was different, the safety of being known, being chosen, being valued for herself rather than what she represented or what she could provide. They stood like that for long minutes, neither willing to break the spell. But eventually, reality intruded in the form of Marcus's voice through Lorenzo's earpiece. "Boss, we have movement at the perimeter. News vans. Looks like Costello leaked this address to the media." Lorenzo's arms tightened around Isabella before he reluctantly stepped back, professionalism sliding back into place even as something softer lingered in his eyes. "How many?" "3 so far, but more are coming. They can't get through the gates, but they're setting up cameras on the street, going live with speculation about whether the missing bride is being held here." "Of course they are." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Vincent's escalating, using public pressure to force my hand. If I don't produce Isabella to prove she's safe, the narrative becomes that I'm holding her against her will. If I do produce her, she's exposed to media scrutiny, and Vincent has eyes on her 24/7. "What do we do?" Isabella asked, fear creeping back in despite the warmth still lingering from their moment together. Lorenzo's eyes were calculating now, the strategic operator emerging to handle the crisis. "We control the narrative before Vincent can. You're going to make a statement, but on our terms. A video released through secure channels showing you're safe, unharmed, and here by choice. We'll include enough detail about the forced marriage and Vincent's history to put him on the defensive. He'll retaliate. Let him. The more he lashes out publicly, the more he exposes himself. And I have the evidence to back up every claim you make." Lorenzo was already pulling out his phone, making calls, setting wheels in motion. "Marcus, set up a recording space, something that looks professional but not staged. I want this released within the hour to every major news outlet simultaneously. And get our lawyer on standby. Vincent's going to scream defamation, and I want to be ready to bury him in documentation." As Lorenzo coordinated the response, Isabella watched him work, seeing the layers of the man she was beginning to understand. The protector, the strategist, the gardener who grew orchids for balance. The guilt-ridden son still atoning for a girl's death 2 decades ago. And underneath it all, the vulnerable man who just admitted that she was cracking open his defenses, making him want things he taught himself not to want. The next hours were a blur of preparation. Isabella was given talking points, but encouraged to speak from the heart. Makeup was applied to conceal the exhaustion, but the bruises on her wrists were left visible, strategic evidence of what she'd been running from. Lorenzo stood just off camera, his presence a steady anchor as she prepared to tell her story to the world. "Remember," he said quietly, just before they started recording, "this is your truth. Speak it clearly, without apology, and let the consequences fall where they may. I'll handle Vincent. You just handle being honest." Isabella nodded, drawing strength from the warmth in his eyes. Then the camera was rolling, and she was speaking words she'd never thought she'd say out loud, exposing the ugly reality of her father's debts and Vincent's coercion, the forced engagement, and the violence that had driven her to run. When it was done, when the recording was complete and being uploaded to secure servers for immediate release, Isabella felt simultaneously lighter and more terrified than she'd ever been. She'd just declared war on Vincent Costello in the most public way possible, and there would be consequences. But she'd done it with her own voice, her own agency, and that was worth the risk. Lorenzo pulled her into his arms as soon as the camera crew left, and Isabella buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, expensive cologne and greenhouse earth, and something uniquely Lorenzo. "Whatever happens next," she whispered, "we face it together, right?" "Together," Lorenzo confirmed, his voice a promise and a vow. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs. You're not alone anymore, Isabella, and neither am I." The video went viral within 3 hours of its release, exploding across social media and news networks with the kind of velocity that transformed private tragedy into public spectacle. Isabella watched the response unfold from Lorenzo's study, his laptop open to multiple news feeds showing her face, her words, her visible bruises being dissected by strangers who suddenly had opinions about her life. "Former bride exposes forced marriage arrangement," read one headline. "Runaway heiress accuses prominent businessman of coercion," claimed another. The comment sections were predictably divided, some people calling her brave, others questioning why she'd waited until after fleeing to speak out, a vocal minority insisting she was lying for attention or money. "Stop reading those," Lorenzo said, gently closing the laptop. "Public opinion is fickle and meaningless. What matters is that your truth is out there, documented and undeniable. Vincent can't claim you're mentally unstable when you're clearly articulate and rational. He can't pretend concern for your safety when you've explicitly stated you're safer away from him." "But he'll try." Isabella stood and moved to the window, watching the news vans that had multiplied outside the gates like vultures circling carrion. "He'll spin this somehow, make himself the victim, claim I'm being manipulated, or he already is." Marcus entered the study carrying a tablet showing a live press conference. Vincent Costello stood behind a podium, looking appropriately concerned and wounded, flanked by expensive lawyers. "Started 20 minutes ago. You'll want to see this." Lorenzo took the tablet, and Isabella moved to stand beside him, watching the man who'd tried to own her now trying to own the narrative. "I'm deeply saddened by Isabella's allegations," Vincent was saying, his voice perfectly modulated between hurt and understanding. "She's clearly been through a traumatic experience, and I can only imagine the confusion and fear she must be feeling. But I want to be clear, our engagement was entered into willingly by both parties, with the full knowledge and consent of her family. Any suggestion of coercion is simply untrue." "What about the bruises visible in her video?" a reporter called out. Vincent's expression flickered just for a second before settling back into concerned sympathy. "I can't speak to injuries I never witnessed or caused. But I do know that Isabella has a history of accidents, of situations where she's hurt herself during episodes of emotional distress. Her father can confirm this." The camera cut to Antonio Romano, looking haggard and defeated, nodding miserably beside his wife. "My daughter has always been fragile," he said, his voice breaking. "Since she was young, she struggled with depression, with harming herself when overwhelmed. We thought marriage to a good man like Vincent would give her stability, purpose. We never imagined she'd react this way." Isabella felt the room spin. Her father was lying on national television, rewriting her history to support Vincent's narrative, painting her as mentally unstable and self-destructive. It was a betrayal so complete, so devastating, that she couldn't even process it properly. "He's lying," she whispered. "I never hurt myself, never had depression or episodes or any of that. He's making it up to protect Vincent, to justify what they tried to do to me." "I know." Lorenzo's arm came around her shoulders, steady and grounding. "And we can prove it. Medical records, school records, testimony from people who actually know you. We'll dismantle every lie your father just told, but we do it strategically, not emotionally." The press conference continued with Vincent fielding questions with practiced ease, positioning himself as a man trying to help a troubled woman while respecting her need for space and treatment. He never once acknowledged the evidence of abuse, the forced nature of the engagement, or his own documented history of violence. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and watching it made Isabella's skin crawl. "He's good at this," Marcus observed grimly. "Better than I expected. He's got the media eating out of his hand, making you look unstable and him look like a concerned saint." "Then we change the game." Lorenzo's voice was cold, controlled fury barely leashed. "Marcus, contact our friends at the federal prosecutor's office. It's time to stop playing defense and go on the offensive. And get me every piece of evidence we have on Vincent, financial records, witness statements, surveillance footage, everything. If he wants to play this in the court of public opinion, we'll drag him into an actual court." Over the next 72 hours, Lorenzo orchestrated a counterattack that was both surgical and devastating. Medical records were released showing Isabella had never been treated for depression or self-harm. Teachers and former employers gave statements describing her as stable, responsible, and showing no signs of mental illness. Friends from college, people Isabella hadn't spoken to in years but who remembered her kindly, came forward to contradict her father's characterization. But the real blow came when Lorenzo's contacts at the FBI held their own press conference, announcing an investigation into Vincent Costello's business operations based on evidence of money laundering, racketeering, and potential involvement in organized crime. They were careful not to connect it directly to Isabella's allegations, but the timing was unmistakable, and the media immediately drew the connections Lorenzo had intended. Runaway Bride's claims gained credibility as federal investigation targets her ex-fiancé, the headlines now read. Is Vincent Costello a concerned citizen, or a criminal trying to silence a witness? Public opinion shifted with whiplash speed, as it always did when a shinier, more dramatic narrative emerged. Vincent went from sympathetic figure to suspected criminal overnight, and suddenly everyone who'd defended him was backpedaling, claiming they'd always had suspicions. Isabella watched it all from the safety of Lorenzo's estate, feeling like she was observing her life from outside her body. The woman on television being discussed and debated didn't quite feel real. She was a character in a story, a symbol of something larger than herself. Abused women fighting back, the corruption of powerful men, the courage it took to speak truth against intimidation. "Your mother's asking to see you," Natasha said one evening, finding Isabella in the library where she'd been hiding from the news coverage. "Mr. Vale says he can arrange it if you're ready." Isabella's heart clenched. She hadn't seen or spoken to her mother since the wedding morning, and the need to know she was truly safe, truly free of Vincent's control, was overwhelming. "When?" "Tomorrow. Secure location, limited time, but completely private. Your father won't be there. Mr. Vale made that a condition." The meeting was arranged at a small park on the edge of the city, carefully chosen for its multiple exits and clear sight lines. Lorenzo insisted on coming, along with Marcus and two other security personnel who positioned themselves at discreet distances, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to give the illusion of privacy. Isabella saw her mother before Maria saw her, and the change in her was shocking. The woman walking toward the designated bench looked smaller somehow, more fragile, as if the past weeks had physically diminished her. But when their eyes met, Maria's face crumpled and she was running, pulling Isabella into an embrace that smelled like home and heartbreak. "My baby," Maria sobbed, her hands framing Isabella's face, checking for injuries with a mother's desperate need to know her child was whole. "I was so scared, so worried. When you ran, when Vincent said you were missing, I thought, I didn't know if you were alive or, I'm okay, Mama." I'm safe. Isabella held her mother tight, feeling tears she hadn't let herself cry sliding hot down her cheeks. I'm so sorry I put you through this, but I couldn't marry him. I couldn't live that life. I know. Maria pulled back, her own tears streaming. I should have protected you better, should have stood up to your father, should have found another way. But I was scared and weak, and I let them both. She couldn't finish, her voice breaking completely. They sat on the bench, holding hands like lifelines, and Isabella told her mother everything. About finding refuge with Lorenzo, about the confrontation with Vincent, about the public battle now playing out in media and courts. Maria listened with a mixture of horror and relief, her grip on Isabella's hands never loosening. This man, Lorenzo Valle, Maria said carefully. He's been good to you? You're not trading one cage for another? Isabella thought about how to answer, about the complexity of what she felt for Lorenzo and what he represented in her life. He's given me choices, Mama. Real choices, not the illusion of them. He's protected me without demanding anything in return except that I trust him. And She paused, feeling vulnerable admitting this even to her mother. I care about him, more than I probably should given the circumstances, but I do. Maria studied her daughter's face with a mother's knowing eyes. He cares for you too. I can tell by the way his people watch you, the way they've positioned themselves around us right now. That kind of protection doesn't come from duty alone. I don't know what happens next, Isabella admitted. Vincent's facing federal charges, but that could take months or years to resolve. My father, she couldn't hide the bitterness in her voice. He chose Vincent and his debts over me. I don't know if I can forgive that. Your father is a weak man who's made terrible choices his entire life. Maria's voice was stronger now, steadier. I've enabled him for too long, prioritized keeping peace over protecting you. But that ends now. I've filed for divorce, Isabella. I'm done being married to a man who would sacrifice his daughter to save himself. The words hit Isabella like a physical shock. Her mother, who'd stayed through decades of gambling and failure and emotional abuse, was finally leaving. Mama, are you sure? Where will you go? How will you? Lorenzo Valle has offered to help me. A small apartment, assistance finding work, legal representation for the divorce. Maria smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Isabella had seen on her face in years. I spent so long being afraid of what would happen if I left, convinced I couldn't survive on my own. But watching you run, watching you choose yourself despite the cost, it showed me that survival isn't the same as living. I want to live again, Bella. Really live, not just exist in fear. Isabella pulled her mother close again, crying now for different reasons. Grief for the years lost to fear, relief that her mother was finally choosing freedom, hope that they both might build lives worth living. Around them, Lorenzo's security maintained their careful perimeter, and Isabella caught sight of Lorenzo himself standing at a distance, his eyes on her with an expression that was tender and protective and something deeper she didn't have words for yet. The meeting lasted an hour before Lorenzo gently indicated it was time to go, the risk of exposure increasing with every minute. Isabella and Maria parted with promises to see each other again soon, properly, without the shadow of fear and surveillance hanging over them. Your mother's stronger than she appears, Lorenzo said as they drove back to the estate. It takes courage to leave a marriage after that many years, especially when you've convinced yourself you're not capable of independence. She learned it from watching me run, Isabella said softly. I never thought my escape would give anyone else courage. But maybe that's how it works. One person chooses freedom, and it shows others that freedom is possible. Lorenzo's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. You've been very brave, Isabella, braver than you probably realize. And you've handled the public scrutiny with grace I'm not sure I could have managed. I had good support. She squeezed his hand. I'm still terrified about what comes next, but I'm not facing it alone anymore. That makes all the difference. The federal investigation into Vincent's operations moved with surprising speed, helped along by the evidence Lorenzo had been collecting for years, and by witnesses who suddenly felt safe enough to come forward now that Vincent's protection had cracked. Within 2 weeks, formal charges were filed for money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy. Vincent's assets were frozen, his operations disrupted, and his carefully constructed reputation lay in ruins. Antonio Romano, desperate to distance himself from the criminal charges threatening to sweep up anyone associated with Vincent's organization, gave a tearful television interview admitting he'd lied about Isabella's mental health, claiming he'd been coerced by Vincent and fear for his family's safety. It was a transparent attempt at self-preservation, and Isabella felt nothing but contempt watching her father try to rewrite history again to paint himself as another victim rather than an active participant in her attempted sale. "He's pathetic," she said, watching the interview from Lorenzo's study, where they'd taken to spending evenings together, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence while he worked, and she read. "He's a cautionary tale," Lorenzo corrected. "A man so accustomed to taking the easy way out that he destroyed his family and his own integrity without even realizing what he was losing until it was gone." He closed his laptop and turned his full attention to Isabella. "But his weakness doesn't define you. You get to choose who you become, who you want to be now that you're free of his influence." "I've been thinking about that," Isabella said. "About what comes next, what I want to do with this freedom I fought so hard for. And I want to help other women, the ones trapped in situations like mine, the ones who think they have no choices because powerful men and weak families have convinced them that submission is their only option." Isabella's voice grew stronger as she spoke, conviction replacing uncertainty. "I want to create something real, something that gives women resources and support to escape, to rebuild, to know they're worth more than what anyone tried to make them accept." Lorenzo's expression softened into something that looked like pride. "That's a good purpose, a worthy one, and I can help. Funding, legal resources, connections to organizations already doing that work." "I don't want your money," Isabella said quickly. "Or I don't want to just take your money. I want to build this myself, earn it, make it something I can point to and say, I created this with my own effort and choices." "Then let me offer you a job instead," Lorenzo proposed. "I've been thinking about expanding my operations to include a formal victim advocacy division, legal assistance, safe housing, protection services for people escaping dangerous situations. You could run it, build it from the ground up, hire staff, create protocols. You'd have full autonomy and a real salary, not charity." The offer took Isabella's breath away with its implications. It was partnership, not rescue, opportunity, not obligation, the chance to transform her trauma into purpose, her escape into a roadmap for others. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want that. I want to build something that matters." "Good." Lorenzo's smile was warm, genuine. "We'll start planning tomorrow, but tonight—" He stood and extended his hand. "I have something to show you." Isabella took his hand and let him lead her through the mansion, out into the gardens where evening was settling in golden light. The greenhouse glowed ahead, and as they approached, she saw he'd filled it with candles, their warm light turning the glass structure into something magical. Inside, a simple dinner was laid out on a small table. Nothing elaborate, just pasta and wine and bread. The kind of comfortable meal you shared with someone you trusted completely. But what caught Isabella's attention was the single orchid in the center of the table, the same one she'd watched Lorenzo tend weeks ago when she'd first discovered his greenhouse sanctuary. "It bloomed," she said softly, touching the delicate purple petals. "You said it might not, that orchids are finicky." Apparently it decided the conditions were right. Lorenzo pulled out her chair and Isabella sat, watching him move around the greenhouse with the same careful attention he brought to everything he did. "I thought we could use an evening that wasn't about strategy or danger or what comes next. Just dinner, just us, just this moment." They ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing, books they'd loved, places they wanted to travel, small dreams that had nothing to do with federal investigations or public scandals. It was the most normal evening Isabella had experienced in months, and the normalcy felt revolutionary in its simplicity. "I've been thinking," Lorenzo said as they finished the wine, the candles burning low around them, "about what it means to build a life with someone. Real partnership, not the kind my father had with my mother where one person dominated and the other endured. Not the kind Vincent tried to force on you where ownership was disguised as protection." Isabella's heart began to race, sensing something significant in his words. What does it mean to you? It means choosing each other every day, not just once. It means trusting someone with your vulnerabilities and respecting theirs. It means building something together that's stronger than what either of you could build alone. Lorenzo reached across the table, taking her hand. I'm not good at this, Isabella. I've spent 20 years avoiding exactly this kind of vulnerability because I was terrified of the pain that comes when you lose someone you love. But you've shown me that avoiding pain also means avoiding joy, avoiding connection, avoiding the possibility of something real. Are you saying, Isabella couldn't finish, hope and fear tangling in her throat? I'm saying I want to try. With you. Building something real, something chosen, something that honors both of our agency and autonomy while creating space for us to be more together than we are apart. He stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and perfect. I'm not proposing marriage. We're both too aware of how that institution can be weaponized to rush into that. But I'm proposing partnership. A life built together, consciously and carefully, with full respect for who we each are and who we want to become. Tears were streaming down Isabella's face now, but they were good tears, healing tears. I want that too. I want to build a life that's ours, not dictated by fear or obligation or anyone's expectations. I want to wake up every morning and choose you, and know that you're choosing me back. Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, and they stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the candlelit greenhouse while orchids bloomed around them and the future stretched ahead full of possibility instead of fear. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of building and becoming. Vincent's trial became a media sensation, and his conviction on multiple charges brought a sense of closure that Isabella hadn't known she needed. Her father's divorce from her mother was finalized, and Maria Romano started over in a small apartment with a job at a bookshop and a peace in her eyes that Isabella had never seen before. Isabella threw herself into creating the victim advocacy division of Lorenzo's company, hiring staff, developing protocols, creating safe houses and legal resources for women escaping dangerous situations. Every person she helped felt like a small redemption, a transformation of her own pain into purpose. And through it all, Lorenzo was there, not controlling or managing, but supporting and partnering. They learned each other slowly, carefully, building trust through 1,000 small choices and daily commitments. He taught her about security and strategy. She taught him about vulnerability and joy. Together they created something neither had thought possible, a relationship built on equity and respect, where protection didn't mean possession and love didn't mean loss of self. One evening, almost exactly a year after Isabella had fled her wedding, they returned to the greenhouse where Lorenzo had first offered her partnership. The orchids were blooming again, and Isabella had learned to tend them herself, finding the same peace in growing things that Lorenzo had always found there. "I have something for you," Lorenzo said, and there was nervousness in his voice that made Isabella smile. Even after a year together, he could still be uncertain, still be vulnerable, and she loved him for it. He pulled out a small box, and Isabella's breath caught. Inside was a ring, not a diamond, but a deep purple sapphire surrounded by smaller stones that caught the greenhouse light. "I know I said I wasn't proposing marriage," Lorenzo began, and Isabella could hear the careful thought behind every word. "And I meant it at the time. But this past year has taught me that marriage doesn't have to be about ownership or obligation. It can be about choice, about commitment, about declaring to the world that this person matters enough to build a legal and social framework around protecting what you've created together." "Lorenzo, let me finish." He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger where it fit perfectly. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, Isabella, not because of debts or arrangements or anything external to who we are together, but because I choose you, today and every day, and I want to formalize that choice in a way that honors both of us. Will you?" Isabella looked at the ring, at the man kneeling before her in the greenhouse that had become their sanctuary, and felt the rightness of this moment settle into her bones. This wasn't the forced wedding she'd fled from. This was choice, pure and simple, offered and accepted freely. "Yes," she said, pulling him up to kiss him properly. "Yes, I'll marry you. I choose this. I choose us. I choose the life we're building together." The wedding, when it happened 3 months later, was nothing like the elaborate cathedral ceremony Isabella had fled from. It was small, intimate, held in the greenhouse surrounded by blooming orchids and the few people who truly mattered: Natasha and the household staff who'd become family, Marcus and the security team who'd protected them both, Maria Romano glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from watching your daughter choose joy, and a handful of the women Isabella had helped through the advocacy program, who wanted to witness her happiness the way she'd witnessed their freedom. There were no 300 guests, no expensive dress bought with blood money, no father walking her down an aisle toward a future she didn't want. Instead, Isabella wore a simple cream dress she'd chosen herself, walked toward Lorenzo through rows of orchids on her own feet, and spoke vows they'd written together about partnership and choice and building something real. "I was running when you found me," Isabella said, her voice strong and clear. "Running from a life I didn't choose, toward an unknown that terrified me. You gave me sanctuary when I needed it most, but more than that, you gave me agency. You taught me that protection and freedom aren't opposites, that love doesn't require surrender, that I could be safe and still be myself. I choose you not because I need rescuing, but because you're the person I want beside me as I continue becoming who I'm meant to be." Lorenzo's eyes were bright with emotion as he spoke his own vows. "I was hiding when you found me, locked in a greenhouse tending plants because people were too risky, too painful, too likely to leave scars. You cracked open my defenses and reminded me that avoiding pain also means avoiding joy. You showed me that I could protect someone without controlling them, that love could be a partnership of equals rather than a power dynamic. I choose you not to atone for past failures, but because you've shown me a future worth building. Together." They exchanged rings, hers the purple sapphire, his a simple band engraved with coordinates marking the spot where she'd hidden in his limousine that first desperate morning. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying leaps lead to the most beautiful landings. When they kissed, sealing promises and futures, and the choice to keep choosing each other, the small gathering erupted in applause. And Isabella, who'd started this journey barefoot and terrified in an underground garage, felt nothing but joy and certainty and the bone-deep knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The reception was simple, held in the garden as the sun set golden over the estate. There were no toasts from distant relatives or business partners, no political maneuvering or careful image management, just people who genuinely cared celebrating something real and hard-won. Maria pulled Isabella aside as the evening wound down, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you, baby. You're so much braver than I ever was, so much stronger. You took the fear I lived with my whole life and transformed it into freedom. Not just for yourself, but for all those women you're helping now. You turned your escape into a roadmap for others." "I learned from you, Mama," Isabella said softly. "You survived decades in an impossible situation and still found the courage to leave when you saw there was another way. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever witnessed." As night fell and stars emerged overhead, Isabella found Lorenzo standing at the edge of the garden, looking out over the grounds they now shared, not as rescuer and rescued, but as partners in every sense that mattered. "What are you thinking?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "That a year ago I thought my life was complete. I had resources, purpose, a carefully constructed existence that felt safe because it was controlled." Lorenzo turned to face her, pulling her close. "I had no idea I was living in a prison of my own making until you showed me what freedom actually looked like. Real freedom, the kind that requires courage and choice and the willingness to be vulnerable." "We freed each other," Isabella said. "That's what partnership means." "Yes." Lorenzo kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that still made her heart race even after a year of small intimacies. "What do you want for our future, Isabella Vale?" The name still felt new, chosen rather than inherited, and Isabella loved the sound of it. "I want to build our advocacy program into something national, help hundreds of women find the courage to choose themselves. I want to keep growing orchids with you in the greenhouse on quiet evenings. I want to have children someday, when we're ready, and teach them that love is about respect and choice, not power and control. I want ordinary happiness and extraordinary purpose, and I want to experience all of it with you." "That sounds perfect," Lorenzo said simply. every word of it. They stood together in the garden as their wedding guests departed, as the estate settled into peaceful quiet, as the future they'd chosen together stretched ahead full of possibility. Isabella thought about the terrified woman who'd hidden in a stranger's limousine, about the long path from that desperate moment to this peaceful one, about every choice that had led her here. She wouldn't trade a single moment of it, not the fear, not the pain, not the uncertainty. Because every experience had shaped her into someone capable of choosing this love, this life, this partnership with a man who'd learned to balance protection with freedom, who grew orchids to balance darkness, who transformed his own guilt into a crusade to help others. Later that night, in the bedroom they now shared, Lorenzo found Isabella standing by the window looking out at the greenhouse glowing in the moonlight. "Second thoughts?" he asked, only half joking. Isabella turned to him with a smile that held nothing but certainty. "Not even for a second. I was just thinking about how far we've both come. From that first morning when I was hiding in your car, terrified and alone, to now. Together. By choice. The best choices are the ones we make freely," Lorenzo said, pulling her into his arms. "And I'll choose you every day for the rest of our lives." "Promise?" Isabella asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Promise," Lorenzo confirmed, sealing the vow with a kiss that tasted of future and hope and the absolute certainty that they'd found something worth every risk, worth every fear, worth every painful step that had led them to each other. In the greenhouse below, orchids continued to bloom, patient and persistent, transforming careful tending into unexpected beauty. Much like the love that had grown between two wounded people who'd learned that sometimes the most terrifying leaps of faith lead to the softest landings, and that freedom chosen is always sweeter than safety imposed. This was their beginning, hard-won and carefully chosen, built on respect and trust, and the revolutionary act of two people deciding they were worth loving exactly as they were. And as they fell asleep in each other's arms, the future stretched ahead full of promise. Not perfect, never promised to be easy, but absolutely completely theirs to build together.